Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are tackling a massive subject. I mean, we are looking at a 40-year cycle of rebellion, acceptance, and, transformation.
We really are.
We're talking about music, specifically the history of alternative rock, from 1980 all the way to today.
It is a huge topic. And what's so fascinating is that when most people hear alternative rock, they immediately think of the 1990s.
Flannel, shirts, grunge, MTV.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you look at the source material we have, it makes it really clear that the story actually starts a full decade earlier.
Yeah, it's like looking at an iceberg, isn't it? The 90s are just the part you see above the water.
But the massive base, the real foundation, is this whole underground movement in the 80s. The sources we're looking at describe this really interesting cycle. It's the periphery rebelling against the center.
That's the core dynamic, right?
That is the core dynamic. The history of alternative rock is just. It's the history of the margins, challenging the mainstream, getting absorbed by that mainstream, and then shattering to form a new margin.
It's almost like a biological process.
It is, like cellular division or something.
So let's unpack that. To understand the rebellion, we have to understand what they were rebelling against. So set the scene for us. It's the early 1980s. What does the mainstream even look like?
Okay, so in the early 80s, if you turned on the radio or looked at the charts, you were just hit with this wall of sound.
A very specific sound.
A very specific, very polished sound. The industry was dominated by, arena-size, hard rock, very commercial, AOR, album-oriented rock, and that glossy pop that was just exploding on MTV.
So we're talking big hair, big guitar solos, big money, bands like Journey, Foreigner.
REO Speedwagon, precisely. It was music designed for mass consumption. It was loud, it was commercial, and it was centered in these major media hubs.
And the production was pristine.
Completely. And that's where the friction started. Because in college towns, in basements, in cities far away from LA or New York, a totally different spirit was brewing.
The DIY spirit. This is where it gets really interesting because it wasn't just one sound, it was more of a mindset.
That's the key. And you see the rise of these independent labels in the U.S., like SST, Twin Tone, Touch and Go.
And they weren't trying to sell millions of records.
Not at all. They were just documenting a scene. The source material calls this early U.S. movement college rock.
Yeah.
These bands were inheriting the speed and the anti-authority vibe of hardcore punk, but, and this is so important, they were adding a layer of free experimentalism to it.
It wasn't just three chords and shouting anymore.
No, not at all. It was like they took the energy of punk but decided they wanted to, explore what their instruments could actually do.
And at the same time, over in the UK, post-punk was fracturing into all these different aesthetics.
Yeah, you had labels like Factory, 4AD, Creation, and they were putting out everything from jangly guitar pop to the really dark atmospheric sounds of goth.
So you have these two parallel tracks running in the underground, and our sources point to one specific moment, one band where this college rock thing really proved it could work.
We have to talk about REM.
REM, and specifically their 1983 album, Murmur.
You absolutely cannot tell this story without Murmur.
I love that album, but why was it so important? Because, when I listen to it, it doesn't sound punk. It's actually kind of soft.
And that's exactly why it mattered. It proved a thesis. REM completely distanced themselves from commercialism. Their lyrics were, ambiguous. Michael Stipe famously wouldn't even print the lyrics.
Mumbled, almost.
Right. And they used these folk rock melodies. It was the total opposite of that arena rock we were talking about. And yet, they found this solid, dedicated audience. Murmur proved a band could exist outside the mainstream machine and still succeed.
It legitimized the whole underground. It showed you didn't need pyrotechnics to get a crowd.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just folk rock. The sources also highlight the sonic innovators who were pushing the boundaries of what a guitar could even do.
You have to mention Sonic Youth here.
Oh, for sure. They weren't just playing guitars. They were, exploring tunings and noise structures.
Yeah.
They were jamming screwdrivers under the strings. They introduced this level of dissonance that influenced basically everything that followed.
And on the UK side, you had the Smiths.
The Smiths, who debuted in 1984, they really set the template for indie, didn't they? They mixed this delicate, beautiful guitar pop with really heavy social themes.
Sensitive, political.
And decidedly not rock and roll in that macho sense.
Yeah.
It gave a voice to the bookish, the shy, the alienated.
Okay, so if we look at this early era, say 1980 to 87, our source material boils it down to three core values that really set the stage.
Right. Number one, distance from commercialism. That's the golden rule.
Always.
Number 2, these bands came from local scenes, college towns, not LA or New York. We're talking Minneapolis, Athens, Georgia, Manchester.
And the third one?
They were picking up on emotions and voices that were just completely ignored by the major labels.
Emotions and voices ignored by the majors. That's a powerful way to say it. It wasn't just about the music. It was about representing a different kind of life.
Is the sound of the outsider.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the foundation. Now we move into the next phase, 1987 to 1990. The sources call this refining the sound. So the attitude was there, but now the production and the song structures start to get smarter.
They evolved. And there is one band and one album that stands as the absolute blueprint for the explosion that was about to happen.
We have to talk about the Pixies.
We have to talk about the Pixies and Surfer Rosa from 1988.
This is where the actual architecture of 90s alternative rock gets defined.
It is. The Pixies perfected this very specific dynamic. You start with a quiet first verse, maybe some clean, spacious guitar, then a sudden massive burst of distortion. That's the loud part.
And then into a super melodic chorus and back to quiet again.
Quiet, loud, quiet. It's like a musical jump scare.
Yeah,
And it sounds simple now because we've heard it a million times. But at the time, this was radical.
Yeah.
And the source makes a very direct link here.
Mm-hmm.
This is the architectural DNA that Nirvana would use to conquer the world.
Kurt Cobain even said it himself, didn't he? That he was basically just trying to rip off the Pixies.
He admitted it freely. It's wild to think the formula for world domination was being cooked up in '88.
But they weren't the only ones innovating.
Oh, no. You had Dinosaur Jr., who brought back the guitar solo and just sheer volume, but mixed it with that slacker attitude. And then you had Fugazi.
Fugazi, the ultimate symbol of DIY, right? $5 shows.
Absolutely. They kept that hardcore spirit, $5 tickets, no merch, total control. But their music was incredibly complex. They proved you could be musically sophisticated and still maintain your punk ethics.
And what was the UK response to all this?
Well, you had the Stone Roses in Manchester, who were blending rock with dance beats, and the rise of shoegaze with My Bloody Valentine.
Ah, shoegaze. Staring at your pedals to create a wall of noise.
A cathedral of noise, exactly, using volume as a texture, burying of vocals. It was very anti-ego.
So the table is set. The ingredients are all there. The quiet, loud dynamic, the noise, the melody, the anti-commercial ethos. And then 1991.
The year everything changed. The year the underground became the overground. Nirvana releases Nevermind.
And it hits #1. It knocks Michael Jackson off the charts. It's the moment the periphery actually storms the center.
Is a complete cultural shockwave. But we should ask the question, what was grunge? Really? Why did it resonate so massively?
Because it wasn't just loud rock music. The source breaks this down into a sort of cocktail.
Yeah, the analysis points to 3 things. First, unstable lyrics. Words that expressed anxiety, confusion, alienation.
Second, that mix of roar and melody we talked about. Cobain wanting to be Black Sabbath and the Beatles at the same time.
And third, those punk ethics. But here's the paradox, and this is where it gets really fascinating.
You have this anti-commercial message.
Being broadcast to a massive global audience by MTV.
The ultimate commercial machine.
That is the defining irony of the 90s. MTV took these anti-commercial values and turned them into a product. Suddenly, feeling alienated was the most marketable thing in the world.
And flannel shirts go from being thrift store clothes to high fashion.
Exactly. And of course, it wasn't just Nirvana. You had the whole Seattle cohort. Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains. But the source makes a really crucial point here. 90s alt wasn't just grunge.
That's a huge misconception.
It is. While Seattle was getting all the press, the diversity in the genre was actually exploding. You had bands like Pavement pioneering that slacker indie sound.
Intentionally leaving mistakes in the recording.
To show they didn't care. You had the Smashing Pumpkins doing something way more theatrical and grand. You had the Breeders. The umbrella of alternative was just getting wider and wider.
Which takes us to the mid to late 90s, after the initial grunge explosion.
Right, from 95 to 99. This is where alternative stops being a specific sound like distortion and flannel and starts becoming, as the source puts it, a cross-genre methodology.
A methodology, so it's about how you make the music, not just what it sounds like.
Precisely. Look at the sub-movements. You had indie rock and lo-fi solidifying with bands like Pavement and Guided by Voices. They established the idea that creativity is more important than budget.
A good song is a good song, even on a cassette tape.
In fact, the hiss makes it better. And you also saw this huge expansion of female artists in the rock space. It wasn't just a boys' club anymore.
Huge. Bjork, PJ Harvey, Hole, garbage.
And they were bringing in totally different textures and perspectives.
Yeah.
Bjork was using electronic beats. but with that same punk, independent attitude.
And meanwhile, in the UK, things were going crazy with Britpop.
Yes, Oasis and Blur, rock became a social phenomenon again, almost like the 60s.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is where that led. That Britpop moment gave way to the experimentalism of bands like Radiohead.
And you had post-rock bands like Tortoise and Mogwai who were just ditching lyrics altogether.
Exactly. Using rock instruments to make something that sounded almost symphonic. So by the end of the 90s, alternative just meant creativity not captured by commercialism. It was a broad church.
And then we hit the millennium, the year 2000, and the cycle starts again.
The resets. The source calls this the post-punk revival, a massive back-to-basics energy.
This is the Strokes, the White Stripes. Yeah. I remember when the Strokes came out, it felt like everyone threw away their baggy pants and bought skinny jeans overnight.
It was a very stylish rebellion. They stripped away all the production bloat of the late 90s. It was raw, it was fast, but there was a key difference this time.
The scale.
The scale got so much bigger. We saw the rise of bands like Arcade Fire, Modest Mouse, Franz Ferdinand, and crucially, the rise of the massive U.S. music festivals. Coachella, Lollapalooza.
Right. And suddenly, the bands that used to be underground
are now headlining the biggest stages in the world. The alternative had become the main attraction. It wasn't the side stage anymore.
Which must have changed the sound.
It had to. You need a different kind of song to reach the person half a mile away in a field. You need those whoa-oh choruses. You need anthems.
Yeah.
So indie rock became bigger, louder, more anthemic.
Which brings us to the next big disruption, the technology. The 2010s and the streaming era.
This changes everything all over again. Streaming just dissolves the borders between genres. When you have access to every song ever recorded, the tribalism of I only listen to punk starts to fade.
Because it's all just sitting there in the same playlist.
Exactly. And the source material points to artists like Tame Impala and Bon Iver as key examples.
Tame Impala is a great one. It's psychedelic rock, but it's produced with a pop sensibility.
And Bon Iver was blending digital processing with folk music. You get this new alt. And again, a strong wave of female artists defining the decade. St. Vincent, Mitski, Phoebe Bridgers.
But the big shift here is in the meaning of the word alternative. It's not about anti-commercialism in the 90s sense anymore.
It can't be, because everything's on the same commercial platform. So alternative shifts. It becomes about an aesthetic attitude. It's about independence and experimentalism in how you produce the art.
It's about creative control.
That's it. It's not about fighting the man anymore. It's about maintaining your own vision.
Which brings us right up to today, the 2020s. Where does that leave us?
The landscape is just completely fractured. The source notes that alternative now often refers to a place more than a genre.
A place as in a platform.
Like
Bandcamp.
Yes. Communities on Bandcamp, the whole bedroom pop phenomenon. It's less about a guitar sound and more about where the music lives and how it's made. Cross-genre production is just the norm now.
And the expert makes this really profound point about the senderless sender.
That's the paradox of our time. In the 90s, you had a center MTV top 40 radio that you could rebel against. You could define yourself by what you weren't.
Today, there's no single center. The culture is too fragmented.
There's no monoculture.
Yeah.
So a massive singular movement like grunge, it's just unlikely to happen again.
That sounds a little bit sad, doesn't it? Like the era of the Great Rock Revolution is over.
Not necessarily. Because the flip side is that the spirit of independence, that DIY ethos from the 80s, is now everywhere. It's embedded in almost every genre.
You don't need a major label anymore.
The barrier to entry is gone. So while we don't have one giant counterculture, we have millions of tiny microcultures.
So the spirit of the 80s underground basically won. It just looks completely different than anyone expected.
Exactly. It permeated everything. The alternative is now the default mode.
So let's just recap this whole journey. We start in the margins of the 1980s with college rock and DIY bands building a network outside the system.
Then we see that sound get refined, architecturalized in the late 80s by bands like the Pixies, which leads to the 90s explosion where the periphery conquers the center.
And then it diversifies, grows massive in the festival era, and finally in the streaming age, that independent spirit just dissolves into the water supply of music itself.
It's the history of the periphery, challenging the center, being absorbed, and then changing shape to rebel all over again. That's the heartbeat of it.
Which leads us to that final provocative thought for you to take away. If the independent spirit is now the norm, if anyone can be an indie artist from their bedroom, where does the next true counterculture come from?
Right. What does rebellion even look like when there's no clear center to rebel against?
That is the question. Maybe the next rebellion won't be musical at all.
Or maybe it'll be a rejection of the digital. A return to the physical, the unrecorded.
Something to think about. And hey, if you really want to understand this evolution, go back and listen. Listen to REM's Murmur. Listen to Surfer Rosa by the Pixies.
Hear the DNA for yourself. It's worth the deep dive.
Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next one.